All right, so let's move on to exactly what Chairman Powell was talking about. So what he was talking about is that the Congress, and exactly what we've been talking about since this crisis first started in early March, is that you need to have a UBI and you need to give people money, you need to make businesses stable, and you need to give people health care. Well, guess what they're doing in Germany? This is how Germany is saving jobs during the pandemic. Turns out they're not having an unemployment spike like we are having in the United States, and let's find out why. Unemployment in the United States is now almost 15%. It's probably much higher than that. The highest since the end of the Great Depression. But in Western Europe, things have worked out very differently during this pandemic. What? You mean they have better politicians than we do? Please don't criticize our politicians. That hurts my feelings. I have daddy issues. Tens of millions of people stopped working, but they didn't lose their jobs, huh? Across the continent, employees have taken advantage of various short-term leave schemes in which the government pays their salaries until activity can resume. In most countries, the programs already existed. That's how forward-thinking these people are. Before the arrival of COVID-19, in place to allow employers to temporarily reduce output in a downturn without firing workers. But they have been radically expanded to deal with the virus. For in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the United Kingdom, it was estimated recently that over 20% of the workforce was on one of these plans. Governments are spending a lot of their own money in order to keep unemployment down, make sure that paychecks continue to arrive, even if workers often don't get the 100% of their normal wages, and they ensure that companies can just pick up where they left off as stay-at-home measures end. The difference in numbers is striking. I mean, unemployment numbers between the United States and everyone else in the world. The IMF expects German unemployment for 2020 to hit around 4%. And the more volatile in the UK, the Bank of England recently warned that unemployment may double to 9%. These schemes have done a lot to keep unemployment down, says Jessica Hinz, an economist at Capital Economics in London. And since the workers are getting paid, that means that consumer spending should recover more quickly. But there are also other benefits for the companies, not just the workers. Since they retain the same staff with the same skill set, workers don't have to deal with uncertainty, and the larger economy doesn't have to incur all the efficiency losses that could be associated with a lot of firing and rehiring. The most famous and longest running of all these European programs is the German Kurzarbeit. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Kurzarbeit. It's a short work scheme. It dates back to the early 20th century, and it is credited with being one of the reasons Germany recovered so quickly from the 2008-2009 recession. Employers can respond to short-term reductions in demand by simply notifying the government, which gives firms the money they need to pay most of the difference. Since the financial crisis, many other large European countries have copied the program or expanded their own versions. They were designed for normal economic downturns, but they have been perfectly suited to the pandemic. So, Dylan, it seems like there's a template for how to deal with this. Germany has 4% unemployment. We have currently 15 and climbing. So why does the United States not learn from this?
Because the United States culturally and politically has no interest in learning from this. Unlike those countries, the United States, led by Pelosi and Trump, saw this as an opportunity to exploit, destroy, and consolidate. So surely they considered what most of the world did in this situation. And instead of doing it, they used it as an opportunity to perpetrate a multi-trillion-dollar economic attack on a targeted population in this country to try to destroy them forever while consolidating wealth. was a policy decision. We just talked about this.
Yeah.
In other words, when I came back, I remember I landed from Europe literally the day Trump gave that speech, and we were talking all in those days, and we were going on, and it was a whole thing. And immediately we were like, and I said, and you said, what do we? Reflexively, UBI and healthcare right now, today, tonight.
On options.
You got to flood them. I mean, and it's not because I'm some sort of a super genius. Okay, like this is a template for like when you have a financial crisis, to Chairman Powell's point, that is a totally different animal. And just because you may have some of similar symptoms with job losses and disruption, the symptoms are not the point. The cause is the entire thing. And if you don't understand the cause, you can't solve the problem. And because there is a template for it, and because I am a human being with open eyes and ears who sees things, when this happened, it was obvious, because it's obvious if your car is out of gas that you want to put gas in the car. So the person who suggests you put gas in the car is not a genius. They're just somebody who knows that there's a gas tank in the car that's empty that needs to be filled. And that's what every other country in the world has done, because it's much cheaper, by the way. You spend far less money. I mean, there's much less loss of life. It's vastly less expensive in the short term. It is profoundly less expensive in the long term. It doesn't create a massive political consolidation to the super wealthy. It doesn't destroy the middle class. It doesn't. But you have to want to do it. And because none of the American politicians wanted to provide that support in any way, shape, or form, and because American politicians explicitly saw this as an opportunity to destroy and consolidate, they took it. I mean, they saw the car was out of gas, and they ran up on the car, ripped the tires off, ripped out the interior, grabbed the radio, and lit it on fire.
I know.
It was out of gas.
And then
they're gonna be like, man, it's going to cost a lot of money to put this car back together.
And they voted for it.
You could have just put gas in the tank.
Could have just done that. Instead, they wrecked the country on purpose, and then they got every progressive to go along with it. Everyone in that,
and then they spend all their time blaming the other side for who wrecked the country.
Yes.
Oh, it's Donald Trump's fault. Oh,
it's the Republicans.
So now it's everybody's.
Yeah. Oh, it's Donald Trump's the most dangerous president in the history of blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi is screwing the country for decades, along with Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell.
But it goes both ways, right? Because then the Republicans are like, oh, it's Pelosi.
That's
Pelosi.
Right.
Like, it works. The knife cuts both ways. But the reality is that's why half the people in this country don't vote.
That is exactly why 100 million people
are not stupid.
That's exactly right. And so now the Republicans are making fun of this latest stimulus, the HEROES Act, because of all the identity politics stuff they put in it. And so now they get red meat to give to their base. And it's exactly what you said. So this two-party system, which really is professional wrestling, because they all work for the same guy, and the conclusion is already set. Just like professional wrestling, they know who's going to win before it starts. Same thing with politics, right? Nancy Pelosi rips up Donald Trump's speech as she's passing his legislative agenda. I get emails from Bernie Sanders telling me all the great shit he got in that bill, even though I know it screwed me hard. And he gave cover to those people. And it goes for there's nobody who's without. I hold Bernie to a higher standard because he actually has a big movement behind him. And he said he wanted to be organizer in chief. And he's the one who suppressed the start of a third party for the last 4 years. And he did it on purpose. And then he sheepdog a bunch of progressives into this corporate party that's screwing them. Even right now, I mean, again, this moment perfectly made for people like Bernie Sanders can't meet the moment. Can't do it because he doesn't want to be Ralph Nader. It is the most pathetic end to a political career that I could ever imagine. And people are going to find out what they did and what they didn't do. People are going to find out the results of this pretty soon. I know because I know you, so I know what's actually coming. But other people don't. And still in the progressive news sphere, they don't have any idea. Because if they did, like you said earlier, a couple weeks ago, they would be screaming like us. The fact that they aren't tells us that they don't really know what's coming, but they will. And I'm used to sticking my chin out at this show and getting it right. So we'll do it again. So do you think, when do you think, Dylan, the rest of the country will catch on to what actually happened? Do you think the news media will ever report it? And do you think the country will ever catch on?
I think it's unlikely, honestly. No, I think it's unlikely that most of the country will ever understand. And I think it's highly unlikely. There'll probably be some interesting documentary films made.
Right.
Remember, after the financial crisis, there were a couple of good documentaries that they did. That
The Big Short
really did a good job. I mean, yeah, even The Big Short kind of was more really missed. I mean, it was a great movie, but it didn't really. It was caught up in the mechanics.
Okay.
I forget who's the guy, Charles something or other. I forget his name. Who did another doc on it? Anyway, my point is, I don't believe anybody. I believe the majority of the country will never understand, because the majority of the country will either believe it was the Republicans' fault or they'll believe it was the Democrats' fault. And the entire apparatus is invested in ensuring that somebody's blamed. So whether it's the unemployment, whether it's, the homelessness, whether it's the lack of health care, whatever the symptom as this sort of slow rolling crisis plays out over the next few years, that symptoms will entirely be exploited and leveraged and blamed on the other side, so to speak, and the media will play along. So I suspect it will likely, maybe in 50 years, somebody will be like, man, that was a great country until all that stuff happened. And why did that? It's the same way. Think about World War. Think about the people don't. Even to this day, how many people really understand the economic dynamics in Germany in the 1930s, where the entire thing was whose fault are the economic problems in Germany?
That's right.
Right, and the city people versus the farmer people, and then ultimately Jews were identified as the problem,
culprit,
right, as to the reason why, and we all know the story there. But was it the Jews' fault that there was economic problems in Germany? Obviously not, right? And so was it any one population's fault that there were those issues in Germany? Obviously not. Were a bunch of decisions made by all of the countries after World War I regarding economic penalties for Germany after that war that ensured Germany's impoverishment, not to mention depression and there's all these macro factors. And so, I think that there's so much intelligence, so many resources, and so much money and time, time, and talent, both on the media apparatus side and on the political apparatus side, to focus on who is to blame within the sort of identity pools, the Republicans, the Democrats, the men, the women, the old, the young, split and slice them and dice them however you want. And there's such ease and fluidity in the currency of that blame, and there's so much, again, money and talent invested in ensuring that if it's Nancy Pelosi's fault, or if it's Donald Trump's fault, or if it's the Republican, I can sleep with that. I can understand that. I can organize around that. I can vote against that.
Right.
If the entire government was faced with the most obvious response, which is simply UBI and healthcare, and just make policies. It's not just Germany. I think I said this to you. Watching all these policies roll out, I think it was in the Netherlands. They were immediately said, listen, we're going to shut everything down. We're going to do all these things we got to do. But everybody needs to understand, it's a policy that any business or person, whatever economic condition a person or business was in before this virus arrived, it is the obligation of the government and the banking system to ensure that every single one of those businesses and one of those individuals is in the same economic condition when this is over. That's not a moral position. That is the cheapest and most efficient economic. Like, if you want to be a ruthless economic planner, the cheapest and most efficient way out of the system, or out of the situation, with the crisis, is that. But if you're looking to create for an opportunity to raid and rob a country, there is no greater opportunity to raid and rob a country than a situation like this, which is what the American politicians did collectively.
collectively. Yeah, I know it's so yeah, so people will
But then what are you going to do with that, right? Once you get to the cognitive dissonance of sort of, let's say you accept the Jimmy and Dylan, story or reporting, and it's more than a story, it's facts, right?
Mhm.
But once I allow myself to internalize those facts, one, I'm forced to reevaluate my relationship with whoever my guy or gal is, if I'm whatever side I love Nancy Pelosi, I love Bernie Sanders, I love Donald Trump, whoever you love, right? It forces you to fall out of love or feel the betrayal that is hard to deal with, and I understand of that. And then once you come on the other side of the betrayal, there's an incredible sense of disempowerment, because now what are you left with? What can you do? You thought your vote mattered. You thought voting was important, all these things. And now you're really left with nothing. And so there's a strong psychological incentive not to hear what we're saying.
Yes.
Which is understandable.
It's a hard to grasp betrayal of the American people by its government. Like, I grew up as a Democrat, so I always thought that it was just half the government that was evil. But of course, now I'm a little bit more of a grown-up, and I understand that it's actually one-party rule, and it's a professional wrestling, and they all work. And so when you see, so it is
Which is why, again, ranked choice voting, just something as simple as ranked choice voting, which is catastrophic for both parties.
Yes, catastrophic.
It doesn't have to be armed insurrection, right? Literally, something as simple as ranked choice voting is profound. It's like dissolves the ground underneath them without ever lifting a glove.
Dylan Ratigan, check him out with Tom Sosnoff's Tasty Trade, Truth or Consequences podcast. Dylan, thanks again.
Skepticism. Truth or Consequences was a game show in like the 50s, I think.
Oh, that's right. I said Truth or Consequences. I meant Truth or Skepticism. Yeah, that was a game show. That's right. Sorry.
Yeah, popular.
Yeah. All right.
More popular than my podcast, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, come on.
Listen,
but not as useful.
Consequences, that was big.
Yeah, but not as useful as your podcast.
Not as useful.
Right.
Not as useful.
Okay, and by the way, we drop for everybody. If you like podcasts, we drop as a one whole podcast the Dylan Ratigan segments we do on this show. Every week we drop the Dylan Ratigan Corona Money Talk podcast. And so if you're into audio podcasts, go check that out. It's available everywhere. Oh, we're going to talk about Joe Rogan doing the big deal. Oh,
people were asking about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it right after this. All right, Dylan. Great to talk to you as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Peace on earth. Peace on earth.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?